Hello, and welcome to the very first ever In Control podcast hosted by myself and Julian. Danny, we're so excited to have you on. Do you want to just really quick intro yourself? Let us know what you've been working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I actually didn't know it was the first one.
Yes, you're our
So,
guinea pig.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Welcome, welcome.
that's good and bad. I mean, it's like I'm going to set the standard, so I think that's a good thing. Um, but yeah, so I've been working in the partnerships space for a long time, probably 15 years or so, and for I actually didn't know that for a long time. So if you asked me what I did 10 years ago, I would have said I worked in sales. And then I later came to realize that most of the sales that I'd done was in fact more partnerships and relationship management. We just didn't call it that at the time.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
interesting. Julian and I are always kind of talking about how a role title doesn't necessarily transcend into what the role actually is. So, in the spirit of highlighting kind of who you are behind that job description, we'd love to explore kind of more in depth what it means to work in partnership.
Yeah, I decided to go to business school and went into the MBA program, not really knowing what I was going to do at the end of it. I didn't go in with a definite plan of I'm going to go into finance and investment banking or consulting like some of my classmates did, but it was more that I kind of experienced a little bit of like the tech world and startups and things. But I really wanted to do that for a big company, and I thought the MBA was the way to do that, but I didn't really know who that was going to be for or what that was going to look like or anything. So yeah, coming out of business school, I got hired by Google straight after graduation, managing a team of like 12 people, and that was working with a few years out of undergrad, and so they were like, oh hey, you know about agencies, you should go work on this team. Um, so yeah, and then I was at Google for almost 9 years overall, and it's in four different offices, three different countries, but pretty much the whole time working with agencies. And so we called it sales, but then as I kind of alluded to at the start of the conversation, I came to realize later it was much more about managing relationships and partnerships.
This is already getting so much going, even down to that, just like reimagining how your role is. Rebecca and I were talking about earlier today how what we've conceived of a lot as growth, for example, is a lot earlier than growth. It's more in product development. And so I do think that how we think about our jobs impacts the kind of activities that we think we can do. And just as a total wild card question here, but did you realize that when you were working there at Google, and then did that shift have any impact on what you were doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of the customers and partners I was working with were like existing relationships because if you're a big company, unless you're a brand new company that's growing quickly, then you're already going to be on Google anyway. So it wasn't new business. It was about managing those existing relationships. But yeah, we called it sales, and if you asked me, I would have said I'm 100% in sales. And then after leaving there to try different things, I realized that wow, sales out in the wider world, the real world maybe, is a completely different thing, and it's much more challenging because you have to, customers, potential customers might not know your brand. It's much more about new business and awareness and things. So then I realized that wow, that's kind of real sales, and that's not what I've been doing, and it's not really what I want to do. Although I've done bits of like new business and stuff earlier in my career, it was much more about relationship management. So I think it's interesting how we use these different terms within different companies and different industries to mean different things, and it's also evolves over time. I don't think we were talking too much about customer success at that point. When I started out at Google, there was definitely customer support and things like that. customer service, but I think that's become a whole thing. So industries change and functions change, and the definition of roles changes quite a lot. So I think that's been a factor as well.
Were you ever having a team of direct reports kind of in that leadership role, or were you always reporting?
So I did a bit of both. So when I first joined Google, my first year or so there, I was managing a team of 12 people, and that was like straight out of the out of the gate. I'd managed people a little bit before that, but definitely not on that scale and that size of company. And there were good things and bad things about it. I think it was the biggest challenge is just the amount of like paperwork to manage a team of that size and doing kind of performance reviews and all of those things. And the challenge I found was that really took me away from being out there with customers or dealing with customers directly, because it's like the model, at least on that team I was on at that time, was that if you're a manager, you manage the team and the team talks to the customers. And that was kind of I always want to be out there, external facing with customers, and
Was there any tension, or maybe to put it in a better light, was there any drama? And did that teach you anything? I like to put the fun back in tension, especially in professionals. It can get scary if, there's too much tension. So,
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. So I think the hardest bits or the most memorable bits that I recall were, I think, just like expectations, is that people come in and team members are doing like a great job and they're kind of hitting all the metrics and things, and then it's kind of like people want to progress quickly. People want to get promoted and things,
I,
and
yeah,
it's
that's
hard.
me in a nutshell. I'm like such a bother.
I mean, we all do, right? And I think it's I felt the same. I was like, I want to progress too. I want to get promoted too. And I think the thing I found that the hardest was kind of managing expectations around that. And I'm like, hey, if I could get all my team promoted, I would, because I want to reward
Right.
them, and I want people to do well, people to succeed. But it's not my call. Like I have to go and argue the case for everyone
Totally.
individually, and my peers who are at the same level as me and also have teams, they're fighting for
Mhm.
their teams. So it becomes this big kind of battle to get people promoted. And I think that was really challenging for me. I think it is for everyone, but I think just managing people's expectations around that, and being like every quarter is this battle of like, how do I fight for my team and get them the ratings that they deserve and things like that. So that was difficult. I think the other the other thing, and I think kind of twinned with that, is like performance management, when you have to like give people a rating, and if they're not performing as well as they should be, you have to kind of message that, and how but how do you do that in as positive way as possible, and keep people engaged and give them an opportunity to turn things around. I think that's really important. So yeah, that was a learning curve for me, being brand new to managing in such a large organization.
So it sounds like giving feedback kind of turned out to be a learning or a challenge that you didn't realize would be difficult when you're in a leadership position. And I'm curious if there were any sort of unexpected challenges that you faced along the way, not necessarily at Google, but just in your career thus far.
So many. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the one thing that came to mind based on what we were talking about a few minutes ago, about we're all impatient, right? We all want to succeed, we all want to progress, we all want to get promoted, we want to get a raise, we all want, whatever it is, like we all want to do that. Um, I'm gonna flip that a little bit and say that the thing that I learned was actually be more patient, because I think I've definitely changed roles or changed jobs based on being impatient, and just being like, I can't wait any longer. I want to move to a different team or move to a new role, or whatever it is. And I think um, looking back, I'm like, yeah, I didn't actually need to jump so quickly. I could have stayed where I was. Maybe maybe you kind of just recommit to the role you're in and get promoted in that role, and then you transfer and you're in a better position when you do that because you're at a higher level. So I think, and a lot of this is the caveat I would give is like a lot of this is like big company stuff. Like if you're in a smaller company, it's probably less kind of you'd have to be quite so strategic in terms of planning things like that. But I think that's the one thing I look back on is kind of like, yeah, I didn't actually need to jump from one thing to another sometimes. When I did, I could have just stuck it out for longer, and I would have probably had a better outcome if I'd done that.
That's interesting. It's advice that I also heard from um, people who'd been in their career for a long time. When I was at Disney, they wanted us back in the office, and driving through the valley was really stressful for me, and it took a while and not as much given. And I really relate to what you shared about because that was also me fresh out of college. And I was kind of a well, I wouldn't say a thorn, but I definitely pushed my wonderful, incredible boss, Stacy. And she was rooting for me too, but at the end of the day, it was out of her control. And when I look back, so many people were like, you have to stay at least a year. And I didn't even make it to a year. But in my case, I had changed industries and moving to column five and getting to work on like Web3 and AI ended up being really good for me. But I do think that impatience is often still there. I don't see that having cooled at all or cooling at all. And then, in San Francisco, it's everyone's like speed, speed, speed. How do we get this moving faster? How do we, and then not just from builds, like a corporate build perspective, but also from the VC side, where it's like
Uh,
you see these VCs that have like really aggressive age limits, like 21 to apply for a fund, or, the older you get, the more questions are being asked about why would you throw everything away? Or not even questions, just that it becomes harder to throw away a career to build, like, to dig into your savings and build some software SaaS solution for like 4 months before raising a single dime. And so I'd love to hear like how you navigate those two because you're in San Francisco, and I mean that's where we met. And so how do you reconcile those two perspectives?
yeah, I think that's hard. I think a lot of the difference is uh, between the two approaches. Like one is startups, right? It's like it's very hustle. You've got to hustle, and yeah, you have to do a lot of work for free sometimes before you can raise, or if you want to get. I've spoken to various people about this, and I think it's been the same situation for you know at least 15, 20 years ever since I first heard about venture capital as a thing and was like, oh, that could be a cool career to go into. Um, and the feedback I've heard a lot is like, how do you get into VC? And people are like, well, you got to work for free for a year, and then you might get your way in there. And I literally heard that only a couple of weeks ago at an event I was at. Somebody said, yeah, I did some free work, and then it was actually for a startup. They got hired rather than a fund. But I've heard that before, especially straight out of undergrad, like kind of got to work for free and then network, and hopefully you can get somewhere from that. So yeah, um, I think one end of the spectrum is like this hustle culture of startups and things, and VC, and then I think for large public companies that at least historically it was more you had a bit more time to do things, and but I think in terms of just realizing when you're in a good situation, you might be frustrated at a startup and you're like, oh, I want to go to a different startup, and then they get acquired or something happens. So I think it's kind of like it's difficult, I think, to weigh your options and kind of realize when you're in a situation where it might be challenging, but it's like when do you recommit or when do you move? And I don't think there's any exact science behind that. I think it's just you can just make an informed guess as best you can. Um, so yeah, I think, but looking back on what I experienced, I think I did jump a little bit too quickly sometimes, and could have stayed with a certain situation longer, and would have probably worked to my advantage.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, you'll rarely lose by just, waiting and biding your time. But you could by
Yeah, you
acting
could.
from desperation and signing up for the wrong thing, which I think is another thing we also see a lot in the city of just like people really pushing their will and then that coming out or being visible at least from afar and seeing like, oh, there's a team or a group of individuals that seem super anxious and where's that all going to lead to? Um,
Yeah, it's hard to know where to place your bets. I've seen people even 20 years into their career do this. I don't know how they do it, but I've seen them do it. Is just do 1 year at a startup and then move to another startup, and you've got some stock vested. So I used to work with somebody who has done this. I'm not going to name them, but I was like, you're literally diversifying yourself by working at a startup for 1 year, 15 months, 18 months, then going to the next one, then going to the next one, because if any of those become big, then they're gonna cash out. Whereas normally, if you place all your eggs in one basket, then it's doesn't work out, then you're starting over. Whereas at least at the big companies, public companies, you're getting stock, right? Like you're getting stock units. At a startup, you could literally work there, work really hard, and end up with nothing. So I think that approach of diversifying yourself and working at multiple, like I said, I don't know how this person's done it when it's like the first question you get asked by a recruiter is like, well, you seem to have jumped around quite a lot. Like, what's that about? But this person seems to be able to navigate that. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I like how we're really smoothly going between big businesses and startups, because in tech or the creative industries in general, it's really easy for me at first to think that like big companies were all um, that it could be for the start of my career. And then but Rebecca, that's really different from your
Yeah.
experience. You've done the opposite, and there's so much that we meet in the middle around.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, do you, Danny, feel as though at those large publicly traded companies, you can still almost be an entrepreneur within the organization?
So I think yes, but I think it really depends on the team that you're on. And I think that's like another learning really is that whatever you know about a big a big company, the team you're on is going to really dictate how that plays out in an everyday sense.
Um, Danny, you and I met through a mutual contact at an event in the city, and then we had a chat, and we were first started talking all about partnerships and these experiences that you've shared with us again. And then we started talking about what it was like being in San Francisco, both as like transplants from beyond, but also as folks that, you know, are not like, I'm not, I don't identify super strongly with the culture. And I really loved hearing about, the way that you talked about culture, but also talked about the way that you could put on your own culture onto the city and all of this, kind of leading up to that event where we met in person, the OutPro networking event. And specifically, I was really struck by how kind and open everyone was. And, for example, Dawn's speech really stayed with me um and and I'd love to dive in, quick, maybe who, what, why, how, and then we can get into those meaningful human moments.
Yeah, that's a great topic, and thank you for introducing that so well. Yeah, so I think it might be useful just to give a quick high level of what Out Professionals is about. Most people won't have heard of it, but hopefully a few more will after this podcast. So yeah, Out Professionals, it's a nonprofit, it's a networking organization for queer professionals, plus friends, plus coworkers, plus allies. And it's been around since the 1980s in New York. And I volunteered at the very first event in San Francisco, and I don't think many other people did volunteer. So the president of the organization asked me if I would like to lead it for SF, and I thought about it for about 30 seconds and said, sure, why not? But yeah, what I like about it, the way we thank you, the way we most people experience Outpro is we have events approximately every 2 months, depending on the time of the year. That can be more like every 4 weeks or 6 weeks, especially as we approach Pride season. Um, my principle was, would I choose to go to Outpro, this type of event, over all the other things that are happening? And that's kind of still what I try to do with our networking events. But yeah, if people want to check it out, it's outprofessionals.org, and all the different chapters are listed there. I think there are 11 now in the US. Or for the San Francisco one specifically, it's OutProSF on Instagram.
Like I liked hearing the story about how you got into it because I think it connects what you shared right before the call about like doing and giving and I'm curious, about what good human connections have come out of this, but maybe in general, we've been dancing around this philosophy that you have of giving and doing and
Yeah, so that was kind of one of the books I read somewhat recently. It's called The Go-Giver. The author is Bob Berg, I believe, Burg. And it's a really short book, and it's very inexpensive on your preferred book vending platform, or hopefully your local bookstore in person, even better. And yeah, the idea is that when if you do things for other people, uh, but you focus on the value for the other person or the other party rather than what's in it for you, then that ultimately will be to your benefit. And I think that's the example they give in the book is like somebody's trying to hit their sales targets, they're really up against it, and they're just like, I'm just going to get any sale through the door and hit my target and get my bonus or whatever. And it actually doesn't work out for them because they're just too focused on their own needs. Where it's like if they actually refocused on the people they're trying to sell to and what do they need, but both from a product and a service, but probably also on more of a personal human level as well, then ultimately that's going to help you build that relationship and build that connection, and it will, it'll benefit you in the long term. So it's a pretty easy read, but what resonated with me was this whole idea of, yeah, that's super important to do things for people in business and a personal sense, but focusing on helping them and what's valuable to them rather than what you're going to get in return. And um, I think that's kind of something we don't see enough of, especially in the kind of climate we're in at the moment.
Such a great the way you mirror it to partnerships in your professional life. It's so yeah, it just works so well. And I think from just being a human and a human perspective, I think when we're doing something for other people, it makes us inherently feel good. It's kind of like the most basic, dumbed down way to say it. But I think when we feel good, that also transcends into our work, our personal life, our family life, and overall just creates like a happier you. It all just kind of comes back to intention, which Julian and I talk about a lot, especially with him recently moving to San Francisco, being exposed to this sort of techie startup culture and what's working and what's not.
just a quick tie back to earlier in our discussion, Danny, when you were talking about like go slower. I think that relates in the sense where like asking, being like, I want this, I want it now is super antithetical to being like, wait a second, what can I do for anyone who I might have just met? I also think it branches in another direction to something you said in our last conversation, our very first conversation, actually. It's this phrase that stuck with me. I'm going to read from my notes here that partnerships should feel like walking up to an open door. Um, and similarly to that way we've been talking about like roles and reimagining them, I think, you know, I think that phrase can extend to so many other functions that we do in a company, getting customers, marketing, of course, partnerships, but also hiring. Just like things should feel like an open door. And part of that open door, what you had said, and I'd love to hear more about, is going to that person being like, what is it that they need? Where do we align on things I can bring them?
Yeah, I think it's about um, it is about not being transactional. Again, I think it's about like how do we succeed together, and that's why I've always enjoyed working in partnerships, even when I didn't know it was partnerships. Was that I was talking to customers at Google, and the best way to describe it is like um, if they spent more money with Google, they made more money as well, right?
Hmm.
So it was a win-win. Incentives were totally aligned. Like we were having the conversation with them, and of course the aim is you always want to grow your book of business and how much a customer spends with you, but in a sales role, but in that situation, it's like, well, everything was totally aligned. If they did invest more with Google, and we would help them do that in the best way, they would also make more money from doing that. And so it's not a, you know, we win, you lose, or we win and you kind of stay where you are or in the middle, whatever. It was really incentives are really closely tied together. And that's a totally different conversation then, because you're going in and you're saying, hey, I'm going to help you make more money, right? I'm going to help you grow your business. And I think there are there are not enough of those situations, but I think there is recognition, and you can read stuff about partnerships now. Like you can spend days or weeks reading about it. There are books on it. There are companies that actually tech companies that do provide infrastructure for partnerships to facilitate and enable partnerships. And this has really become this phenomenon over the past probably the past 10 years or so. And maybe that's why we didn't call it that when I was doing it originally. There is this whole ecosystem built up around that now, and there are thought leaders on it. There are, all these things you can tap into, and LinkedIn has whole, communities and things dedicated to that. So yeah, I think that's why it is important, because it is like we're succeeding together, um, and what's good for one partner is good for the other one.
As a last question, what's getting you riled up, and what does that look like in the near
Great
future for
question.
you?
Yeah, quite a few things. I think really for the past couple of years, really, it's really been about events and live experiences, in-person experiences. I know we're obviously on video today, but generally I don't do too many video calls if I can help it. I much rather, of course, if you're not in the same city, you have to, but I'm much more about live in-person experiences, like creating those, producing those, promoting those, also attending other people's events. So I think, yeah, what I'm trying to figure out is a nice way to combine that with my tech experience. So maybe like partnerships for an event platform. There's quite a lot of innovation in that space. I made one of my projects is kind of map out all the different players in the event tech space, and I have like a list of about 30 so far. Some are like hosting events like Eventbrite or Luma, that kind of thing, and some are more for how do you find venues, or how do you find vendors, or managing logistics and things. So yeah, I don't know exactly where it's going at the moment, but I think there's something there, and I'm kind of excited about the potential behind that, and that's kind of hopefully what I'm going to be working on in the near future.
Nice. It's awesome.
All right. Well, thanks so much again for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Yeah, enjoy your Tuesday.
You too. Thanks so much.